"Stop, I'll buy those obese twins. Without them I'd be dead," the mountain man shouted at auction. Dust swirled in the street. A crowd jeered as two trembling sisters stood on the block, their cruel uncle selling them like cattle. Then Boots thundered on the boards. A scarred mountain man, voice rough as gravel, slammed down his last coins. He wasn't buying them for work. He was buying them because years ago, their mother had saved his life. But what should have been a rescue turns into a fight for survival. The railroad wants his land. Hired guns prowl the night. And hidden in the twins' past is a treaty paper that could change the fate of the whole town. As flames rise and the cabin falls, only faith and family stand between them and ruin. Will this unlikely family find justice before the railroad crushes everything they love? Or will the mountains claim them all? Before we begin, I invite you to take a breath. This space is for the quiet believers, the ones who know small kindnesses can ripple into something greater. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty street of the Colorado mining town. In front of the weathered saloon, a makeshift auction block stood like a wound in the earth. The crowd gathered around it shifted and muttered, their boots scraping against the packed dirt. Uncle Wade yanked Kathleen and Susanna forward, his fingers digging into their arms. The twins stumbled, their plain cotton dresses dusty from the rough handling. Kathleen's chin trembled but stayed high, while Susanna's eyes remained fixed on the ground. "Here we have two fine workers," the auctioneer called out, his voice oily. "Might need extra feed, but they'll do any chore you give them." Cruel laughter rippled through the crowd. Someone shouted, "They'll eat more than they're worth." Another voice added, "Might break your wagon springs." Kathleen's cheeks burned red, but she gripped her sister's hand tighter. Susanna squeezed back, their shared touch a silent prayer in the face of mockery. The auctioneer adjusted his vest, trying to drum up interest. "Now folks, who'll start the bidding? These girls know their way around a kitchen. Extra mouths, yes, but extra hands, too." The crowd's taunting grew louder. Uncle Wade stood to the side, his face twisted with impatience and greed. He'd already spent their mother's savings on cards and whiskey. Now he meant to be rid of them entirely. The sudden thunder of boots on wooden planks cut through the jeering. A tall figure emerged from the street, his buckskins worn and patched from seasons in the mountains. Scars marked his weathered face, and his beard was shot through with gray. The crowd parted before him like water on a stone. Kendrick. McCord's calloused hand slammed down on the auction block with such force that the wood creaked. "Stop!" His voice boomed across the street. "I'll buy those obese twins. Without them, I'd be dead." The declaration hung in the air for a moment before the crowd erupted in fresh laughter. Some pointed at the wild-looking trapper, others whispered about his reputation. "McCord's gone soft in the head," someone called out. Mountain Man's finally lost his mind, but Kendrick ignored them all. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, fixed on Uncle Wade. With deliberate movements, he pulled out a leather pouch and counted out crumpled bills. The money was worn smooth from long storage, clearly his season's earnings from trapping. Uncle Wade's lip curled as he snatched the bills, counting them quickly. "Take 'em then," he sneered. "Your problem now." The twins stood frozen, staring at the mountain man who just bought them. Kendrick's expression softened slightly as he turned to them. "Come on," he said gruffly. "Got my wagon round back." The crowd began to disperse, entertainment over, though some lingered to watch. Kendrick led the way to an old wagon, its wood weathered but solid. With surprising gentleness, he helped first Susanna, then Kathleen climb onto the bench seat. The twins settled themselves, shoulders touching for comfort. Their few belongings, 2 small bags containing their mother's Bible and some clothes, sat between their feet. Questions burned in their throats, but neither dared speak yet. Kendrick checked the harness, then climbed up beside them. The bench creaked under their combined weight, but held firm. Without a word, he flicked the reins, and the horse stepped forward. As they rolled past the saloon, Kathleen caught sight of Uncle Wade already heading inside, their money clutched in his fist. She turned away, focusing instead on the strange man beside her. His profile was stern in the fading light, but something about his presence felt solid, dependable. The sun sank toward the mountains as they left the town behind. Dust rose from the wagon wheels, gilded by the last rays of daylight. Susanna hummed softly one of their mother's hymns, while Kathleen watched the familiar buildings shrink behind them. Their new guardian said nothing, but his hands were steady on the reins as he guided them toward whatever future awaited. The twins exchanged a look over their shared silence, both aware that while they didn't understand this sudden change, they were at least facing it together. The road stretched ahead, winding into the gathering dusk. Behind them, the town's mocking laughter faded away, replaced by the gentle creak of wagon wheels and the steady clip-clop of hoofbeats, leading them toward an uncertain tomorrow. The wagon wheels groaned against well-worn ruts as darkness crept across the Colorado sky. Stars began to wink into view, one by one, like distant campfires in the vast darkness above. The steady clip-clop of hooves and the occasional snort from the horse were the only sounds breaking the evening silence. Kendrick guided the wagon off the main trail toward a small creek, where cottonwoods cast long shadows in the failing light. "We'll make camp here," he said, his voice rough from disuse. It was the first time he'd spoken since leaving town. The twins climbed down carefully from the wagon seat, their legs stiff from the journey. Kathleen stretched her back while Susanna gathered their meager belongings. They watched as Kendrick moved with practiced efficiency, unloading supplies and tending to the horse. In minutes, he had a fire pit scraped out and lined with stones. His weathered hands worked surely with flint and steel, sending sparks into a neat pile of tinder. Soon, a cheerful flame pushed back the gathering darkness. From his supplies, Kendrick pulled out a battered pot and a small sack of beans. He added water from the creek and set the pot to boil, then mixed a simple bannock dough in a tin plate. The familiar motion spoke of countless nights spent alone in the wilderness. The aroma of cooking beans filled the air as the three sat in awkward silence around the fire. Finally, Kathleen gathered her courage. "Sir," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "what did you mean at the auction? About us saving your life?" Kendrick paused in his cooking, staring into the flames as if seeing something far away. "Weren't you exactly," he said slowly. "Was your mother?" Susanna leaned forward, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Our mother?" Kendrick nodded, using a stick to push the bannock closer to the coals. 3 winters back. Got caught in an early storm up in the high country. Lost my horse, most of my gear." He paused, remembering. "Was half dead when I found your mother's cabin." The twins exchanged glances. They remembered that cabin well, their mother's pride and joy, built by their father before fever took him. "She took me in," Kendrick continued, his voice growing softer. "Didn't have much herself, just you 2 girls and what she'd put by for winter. But she shared what she had. Fed me her last flour cakes, kept me alive till the weather broke." He looked up at them then, his eyes dark with memory. "Without her kindness, I'd have been nothing but bones in the snow." Kathleen's hands twisted in her lap. "Why didn't you ever come back?" The question held years of struggle, of watching their mother work herself to exhaustion, of finally losing her to consumption the previous spring. Shame crossed Kendrick's weathered face. "Ain't proud of that," he admitted. "Spent years running from things I should have faced, wandering when I should have been settling." He poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling up into the darkness. "Your mother's goodness, it showed me something I wasn't ready to see." The coyotes began their nightly chorus in the distance, their yips and howls echoing across the valley. Kendrick served up the beans and bannock in tin cups, and they ate in thoughtful silence. Later, as they settled under Blankets near the fire, Susanna turned to her sister. "Kathy," she whispered, though Kendrick appeared to be sleeping on the other side of the flames, "do you reckon maybe God hasn't forgotten us after all?" Kathleen reached for her sister's hand in the darkness. "Maybe not," she whispered back. "Maybe. He knew we'd need someone like Mr. McCord." Kendrick lay still, his eyes closed but his mind active. The girl's whispered words of faith stirred something long dormant in his heart. Memories of his own mother's prayers, of hymns sung in candlelight, of a belief in providence he'd thought lost to years of solitude. The fire crackled softly, sending up occasional sparks to join the stars. The creek murmured its endless song, and somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. 3 people who had begun the day as strangers now rested under the same sky, bound together by a debt of gratitude, and the first tentative threads of trust. Dawn crept over the mountains, painting the sky in wisps of pale gray. The morning air bit sharp and cold, making breath visible in little clouds. Frost sparkled on the wagon seat and blankets, a reminder that autumn was deepening toward winter. Kendrick rose first, stirring the banked coals of their campfire back to life. He moved with the quiet efficiency of long practice, setting coffee to boil while the twins still blinked sleep from their eyes. "Best learn how to pack proper," he said, gesturing the girls over. "Watch close now." His rough hands demonstrated each step with careful precision. "Fold the blankets tight, like so. Keeps them dry and saves space." Kathleen and Susanna followed his movements, their cold fingers clumsy but determined. When Susanna struggled with a particularly stubborn knot, Kendrick showed her again, his patience surprising them both. "That's the way," he nodded as they secured the last of the gear. "Everything needs its place on the trail." The sun climbed higher as they set out, the wagon creaking beneath them. The trail wound upward through stands of towering pines, their branches reaching like fingers across the sky. Kathleen found herself gaping at the sheer walls of stone rising around them, while Susanna pointed out patches of late wildflowers clinging to sunny slopes. The steady sway of the wagon and the previous night's poor sleep soon had both girls nodding. They took turns dozing against each other's shoulders, starting awake at particularly rough patches of trail. Near midday, Kendrick pulled up beside a creek that tumbled crystal clear over moss-covered rocks. "Time to water the mule," he announced. "Both of you need to learn this too." He showed them how to fill the wooden buckets without getting soaked, though both girls managed to splash themselves anyway. Kathleen nearly dropped her bucket when the mule snorted suddenly, making Susanna giggle. Soon they were both laughing at their wet boots and clumsy attempts. "You'll get the hang of it," Kendrick said, the corners of his mouth twitching upward slightly. It wasn't quite a smile, but it softened his scarred face. The moment felt lighter somehow. The memory of yesterday's auction, less raw. The afternoon stretched long, the trail climbing steadily higher. Shadows were growing long when they finally crested a ridge, and there, nestled in a high meadow, stood Kendrick's cabin. Smoke curled from its stone chimney into the evening air, and the setting sun lit its log walls golden. "That's home now," Kendrick said simply, pointing toward the sturdy structure. The girls exchanged glances, hope and uncertainty mingling in their expressions. As they drew closer, they could see the careful craftsmanship of the cabin: straight-hewn logs, tight-chinked walls, a roof of split shakes that spoke of hours of patient labor. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine pitch and leather, with rows of cured hides hanging from the rafters. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, while rough-hewn furniture, a table, chairs, and bunks filled the space with honest simplicity. "Need to sweep out proper," Kendrick said, handing them a broom made of bound twigs. "Then we'll see about supper." The girls took turns with the broom while Kendrick brought in supplies from the wagon. Soon the cabin's single room was as tidy as they could make it. Kendrick showed them where he kept the food stores, and together they prepared a simple meal of salt pork and potatoes, The lamp's warm glow softened their faces as they sat at the table, steam rising from their plates. It wasn't fancy fare, but after the long day's journey, it tasted like a feast. When the dishes were cleared, an awkward silence fell. Kathleen and Susanna exchanged meaningful looks, remembering their mother's evening ritual. Finally, Susanna spoke softly. "Mama always had us pray before bed." Kendrick shifted in his chair, something flickering across his weathered features. After a long moment, he nodded. "Reckon that's proper." They knelt together on the rough plank floor, the twins, voices tremulous but growing stronger as they recalled their mother's familiar words. Kendrick remained silent, but his bowed head and closed eyes spoke of memories stirred by their simple faith. The lamp burned low as they settled into their new sleeping places, the twins in one bunk, Kendrick in the other. Outside, a night wind whispered through the pines, and somewhere in the darkness, an owl called softly. The first rays of dawn found Kendrick already awake, stoking the cook fire as autumn's chill crept through the cabin's walls. Like clockwork, he roused the twins from their shared bunk, his gruff voice gentled by routine. "Time for chores," he called. "Cow won't milk herself." Each morning brought the same tasks. The scrawny brown cow waited in her lean-to, steam rising from her nose in the cold air. At first, the twins' fingers fumbled with the unfamiliar rhythm of milking, but Kendrick's patient demonstrations helped them improve. Susanna especially took to it, murmuring softly to the cow as she worked. "You've got away with her," Kendrick observed one morning, watching Susanna stroke the cow's flank. The girl's face brightened at the rare praise. Splitting kindling proved more challenging. Kathleen struggled with the weight of the axe until Kendrick showed her how to let gravity do the work. Soon enough, she developed a steady rhythm, the sharp crack of splitting wood echoing across the meadow dot inside the cabin. The cook fire needed constant tending. The twins learned to judge the heat by holding their hands over the flames, adding small sticks or banking coals as needed. Kendrick taught them to start with dry pine needles and work up to larger pieces, though they still occasionally filled the cabin with smoke dot as the days passed. Each girl found her strength. Kathleen discovered an unexpected talent for bread making, kneading the dough with determination despite her aching arms. Her first attempts came out dense and misshapen, but she improved with each try. "Least it ain't hard as rock anymore," she joked one evening, holding up a particularly lopsided loaf. Susanna giggled, and even Kendrick's mouth twitched in amusement. While Kathleen mastered the hearth, Susanna thrived outside. Beyond the cow, she took to feeding the chickens and collecting eggs, speaking to each hen by name. She even convinced Kendrick to let her help curry the mule, though the ornery creature tested her patience. On the 7th evening, Kendrick sat at the rough-hewn table, watching the twins share jokes over Kathleen's latest bread attempt. Something warm stirred in his chest, unfamiliar after so many years alone. The cabin felt different now, filled with life and laughter instead of just silence. The peace shattered with 3 sharp knocks on the cabin door. Kendrick rose, hand instinctively moving toward his rifle before catching himself. The twins fell silent, watching as he crossed to the door and pulled it open. 3 men stood on the threshold. The one in front wore a crisp suit, despite the dust of travel, his beard neatly trimmed and his eyes sharp with purpose. Behind him, 2 younger men clutched surveying equipment and maps. "Mr. McCord?" The well-dressed man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Harlan Briggs, Northern Pacific Railroad. May we step inside?" Kendrick's jaw tightened, but he stood aside. The men filed, in Briggs's gaze sweeping the cabin's interior before settling on the twins with barely concealed disdain. "I'll be direct," Briggs said, pulling papers from his coat. "Your land lies directly in the railroad's planned right-of-way. The company's prepared to offer fair compensation, provided you vacate by spring." He thrust the documents toward Kendrick. "Simply sign here, and no." Kendrick's voice cut like steel. Briggs's smile thinned. Perhaps you misunderstand. This isn't a request. The railroad's coming through one way or another. Best make it easy on yourself in these." He glanced at the twins again. "Dependents of yours." "I understand fine." Kendrick stepped forward, his height forcing Briggs to look up. "This is my land. Now get out." "The company won't take kindly to." Kendrick grabbed the door handle. "Get out." The slam of the heavy door echoed through the cabin. Outside, they heard Briggs call back, "Think it over, McCord. Spring's coming faster than you think." Silence fell heavy over the evening meal. The twins picked at their food, exchanging worried glances. Finally, Susanna spoke in a small voice. "Will we have to leave?" Kendrick looked up from his plate, seeing the fear in both girls' faces. They'd already lost one home to their uncle's cruelty. Now, just as they'd found another, it too seemed threatened. "No," he said firmly. "This is our land. We'll stand against them." But after the twins had gone to bed, Kendrick sat alone by the dying fire, doubt gnawing at his gut. One scarred mountain man and two vulnerable girls against the mighty railroad. What chance did they really have? Still, looking at the sleeping twins, he knew he had to try. He'd failed their mother once by wandering away. He wouldn't fail her daughters now. The days grew shorter as winter's chill crept across the mountain meadow. Frost painted the grass each morning, and the twins learned to wrap their shawls tighter against the biting wind. Kendrick watched them adapting, noting how they no longer complained about the early rises or the endless chores. "Time you learned proper frontier skills," he announced one morning after breakfast. "Can't survive up here without knowing the basics." He started with snares, showing them how to bend supple branches and set wire loops along rabbit trails. His scarred hands moved with practiced ease as he demonstrated the proper knots. "Like this?" Kathleen asked, her tongue caught between her teeth as she copied his movements. "Almost." Kendrick adjusted her grip. "Rabbit won't wait while you fumble. With the wire, got to be quick and sure." The lessons continued daily. Kendrick taught them to stack firewood properly, explaining how wet wood needed to dry before burning. To their surprise, Kathleen showed remarkable strength with the axe. Her first attempt sent the blade glancing off the logs, but she persisted until she found her rhythm. "Never seen anyone take to wood splitting so natural," Kendrick remarked one afternoon, watching her steady swing. Kathleen paused, sweat gleaming on her forehead despite the cold. "Reckon being big has its advantages after all," she said, a hint of pride in her voice. While Kathleen mastered the axe, Susanna's gentle nature found its purpose with the animals. She developed a morning routine, talking softly to the cow during milking and scattering feed for the chickens. Even the suspicious hens grew to trust her, pecking corn from her outstretched hand. The old cookstove demanded constant attention as temperatures dropped. Kendrick showed them how to bank the coals at night and revive them come morning. "Fire's life up here," he explained. "Let it die, and the cold creeps in quick." One evening, as shadows lengthened across the cabin floor, Kendrick looked up from his mending to hear something unexpected. The twins, working at the table, had begun singing softly. Their voices blended in a familiar hymn, one he remembered their mother singing during that long-ago winter. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound." The words stirred something deep in Kendrick's chest. Without thinking, he joined in, his rough voice hesitant at first. The twins faltered for a moment, then continued stronger. The simple melody filled the cabin, weaving through the lamplight and warming the space better than any fire. When the song ended, Susanna wiped her eyes. "Mama always sang that one while she worked." Kendrick nodded, his throat tight. "She did it that." The next week brought a necessary trip to town for supplies. As their wagon rolled down the muddy street, Kendrick noticed the sideways glances and whispered conversations. Word of his defiance against the railroad had spread "Fool's errand," one man muttered as they passed. "Railroad always wins." At the general store, laughter erupted from a group of men when the twins climbed down from the wagon. Kendrick's hands tightened on the reins, but before he could speak, Kathleen straightened her spine. She marched past the men with her head high, taking the empty flour sacks from Kendrick's grip. "I can manage these, sir," she said clearly, loud. Enough for all to hear. The merchant, who had been watching the scene unfold, raised his eyebrows as Kathleen hefted the heavy sacks with surprising strength. The laughter died away, replaced by thoughtful silence. Loading the wagon took less time with Kathleen's help. As they finished, the merchant stepped outside, nodding slowly. "Good worker you got there, McCord," he said, respect evident in his tone. Kendrick helped the twins back onto the wagon seat. "Two good workers," he corrected, including Susanna in his glance. Both girls sat a little straighter. The return journey began as sunset painted the sky in deep purples and golds. As they crested the last hill before home, something cold touched Kendrick's cheek. Looking up, he saw the first snowflakes of the season drifting down, catching the fading light like scattered diamonds. "Snow's coming," Susanna breathed, holding out her hand to catch the flakes. "Aye," Kendrick agreed, his expression grave. "Winter's not far behind." The twins huddled closer on the seat as the snow began falling faster, dusting the trail ahead in white. None of them spoke of the railroad or coming spring, but the knowledge lay heavy between them. For now, they watched the snow transform. Their world, each lost in private thoughts about the challenges ahead. A week passed, and winter's grip tightened on the mountain. Kendrick hitched the wagon for their regular trading journey. The twins bundled against the biting wind. As they approached town, something felt different. The usually bustling streets lay quiet, with only a few people hurrying past with worried faces. Outside the general store, they found Mr. Peterson, the merchant, looking troubled. "Influenza's hit hard," he explained, coughing into his sleeve. "Half the town's down sick, including my wife." Kathleen and Susanna exchanged glances, memories of their mother's teaching stirring. "We know something about nursing," Susanna said softly. "Mama taught us her remedies." "Might be of help," Kathleen added, her voice stronger. "We could stay a spell." Kendrick studied their determined faces. "You sure about this?" "Yes, sir," they answered together. They started at the boarding house where several miners lay burning with fever. Some folks sneered at first, seeing the overweight twins enter with their baskets of herbs. But their mockery soon faded as they watched the sisters work. Susanna moved from bed to bed, her gentle hands bathing hot foreheads with cool cloths. Kathleen brewed their mother's herb tea, adding honey to soothe raw throats. They worked tirelessly, speaking soft words of comfort to delirious patients. "My mama's remedy," Kathleen would say, helping a miner sip the bitter tea. "Willow bark for the fever, yarrow to sweat it out." Outside, Kendrick kept the fires burning. His axe rang through the cold air as he split wood for every house that needed it. He hauled water from the well, filling buckets for the sick and their caregivers. Some days, he'd pause in his work to watch through windows as his girls tended the ill, pride warming his chest. The sisters worked from dawn to dusk. When patients thrashed in fever dreams, they'd sing the old hymns their mother had taught them. Their clear voices brought peace to troubled minds, and even the most restless would settle under their care. "Amazing grace," they'd sing, spooning broth into weak mouths. How sweet the sound. By the fourth day, improvement showed in some patients. Mr. Peterson's wife opened her eyes, fever broken, and asked for water. A young miner sat up in bed, color returning to his face. Each small victory gave the sisters new energy to continue their work. Word spread through town about the twins' dedication. The same folks who had laughed at them now watched with growing respect. They saw beyond the girls' size to their caring hearts and capable hands. On the seventh day, Mrs. Peterson insisted on getting up to bake bread. Thanks to those dear girls, she told anyone who would listen. They nursed me through the worst of it. That evening, as they prepared to leave, townspeople gathered to thank them. Mr. Peterson stepped forward, pressing a small burlap sack into Kathleen's hands. "Sugar," he said gruffly. "Not much, but it's what we can spare. You girls earned it fair and square." The wagon ride home was quiet at first. Stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky, bright and sharp in the mountain air. Suddenly, Susanna began to weep, her shoulders shaking. "What's troubling you, girl?" Kendrick asked, concern rough in his voice. "I never thought," Susanna wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "Never thought I'd be useful to anyone. People always saw us as burdens, but this week you proved them wrong," Kendrick finished. He cleared his throat. "Done more good than most men I've known, both of you. Your mama would be proud." Kathleen reached for her sister's hand, squeezing it tight. Above them, the stars glittered like scattered diamonds, and in their hearts, something new took root. A sense of belonging, of worth, of having found their place in this rugged mountain world. The mules' hooves beat a steady rhythm on the trail. Home, and the night air carried the sweet scent of pine. None of them spoke again, but the silence was filled with contentment, warmer than any fire could provide. Sunday dawned clear and cold, the mountain air sharp as glass. Kendrick hitched the wagon while the twins dressed in their best clothes. Worn but clean. He had promised them church, knowing they missed their mother's teachings. The old mule picked its way down the mountain trail, frost crunching under iron-shod hooves. The small clapboard church sat at the edge of town, its white paint peeling but its cross standing proud against the blue sky. As they tied up the mule, other wagons arrived, bringing families wrapped in quilts against the morning chill. A few curious glances followed the twins, but none held the old mockery. Reverend Littlefeather stood at the door, greeting his flock. The Cherokee preacher's black coat was neat despite its age, and his eyes held warmth as he welcomed them. "Brother McCord," he said, clasping Kendrick's hand. "And these must be your girls. Welcome to God's house." Inside, sunlight streamed through plain glass windows, catching dust motes in golden beams. The wooden pews were smooth from years of use. Kathleen and Susanna sat close to Kendrick, their shoulders touching, as if drawing strength from each other. The service began with familiar hymns. The twins' voices rose clear and sweet, remembered words flowing easily. Kendrick noticed others turning to listen, appreciation replacing judgment on their faces. Reverend Littlefeather's sermon spoke of perseverance through trials, of God's provision in unexpected ways. His gentle voice filled the small space with hope. After the final prayer, people gathered for fellowship, sharing news and coffee from huge tin pots. The twins helped serve, passing around cornbread and preserves. As they moved among the congregation, Reverend Littlefeather overheard them answer a woman's question about their family name. The preacher's expression changed, thoughtful lines creasing his forehead. He drew Kendrick aside, speaking low. "Brother McCord, those girls, their mother, did she live up near Eagle Creek?" Kendrick nodded, curious at the preacher's intensity. "I remember her," Reverend Littlefeather continued. "Years ago, she showed me an important document, a treaty granting grazing rights in these mountains. It was signed by territorial officials. Perfectly legal. Those rights would supersede any railroad claims." Kendrick's eyes widened. "You're certain?" "As God's my witness," the preacher affirmed. "That document could save your land." Nearby, the twins had frozen, overhearing. Kathleen's hand clutched her sister's arm. "Mama's chest," she whispered. "The one lined with cedar, she kept important papers in it." "At Uncle Wade's barn," Susanna added, her voice trembling. "We left it behind when he—" She couldn't finish, the memory of the auction still raw. Kendrick's jaw set hard. "Then we'll just have to get it back." They said their goodbyes, minds churning with this new hope. The ride home was filled with the twins' memories, fragments surfacing like gold dust in a pan. It smelled so sweet, Kathleen recalled. All that cedar wood. Mama would open it sometimes, Susanna added, just to touch the papers inside. Said they were our future. Back at the cabin, they gathered around the table for a simple supper of cornbread and beans. The twins couldn't stop talking about the chest, each memory leading to another. Outside, snow began falling harder, wind moaning around the eaves, but inside, the lamplight glowed warm on their faces. Soon as weather breaks, Kendrick promised, breaking his cornbread, we'll go fetch that chest. Your mama knew what she was doing, keeping those papers safe. The twins exchanged glances, hope kindling in their eyes. This wasn't just about keeping their new home anymore. It was about claiming their rightful inheritance, their mother's final gift to them. Reckon the railroad men won't be so mighty proud once they see that treaty, Kathleen said, a new strength in her voice. No, Kendrick agreed. Reckon they won't. The wind outside grew stronger, rattling the window panes, but they paid it no mind. Snow might delay them, but it couldn't stop them. Their small household, bound first by debt and growing now through love, had found new purpose. The treaty wasn't just paper. It was proof they belonged here, that this land was meant to be their home. As they finished their meal, the lamps' glow seemed brighter somehow, as if reflecting the hope that had taken root in their hearts. They had a chance now, a real chance to fight back against the railroad's greed. And they would face it together, as a family. Morning arrived beneath a steel-gray sky, the air sharp enough to steal breath. Frost coated every surface, making the world glitter despite the weak sunlight. Kendrick moved with purpose, his boots crunching across the frozen ground as he hitched the old mule to the wagon. Kathleen and Susanna emerged from the cabin, wrapped in every blanket they could spare. Their cheeks were already pink from the biting cold as they climbed onto the wagon seat beside Kendrick. Without a word, he flicked the reins, and they set out down the mountain trail. The journey to Uncle Wade's farm stretched long and bitter. Their breath formed white clouds in the air, and the twins huddled close for warmth. The wagon wheels creaked over frozen ruts, each mile marked by the mule's steady plodding and the occasional cry of winter birds. Your uncle, Kendrick said. After hours of silence, he might not take kindly to our visit. We know, Kathleen replied, her voice firm despite her shivers. But Mama's chest belongs to us. By midday, they approached the familiar boundary of their uncle's land. The old farmstead looked worse than they remembered, fences leaning, fields untended. The barn stood like a wounded thing, its gray boards weather-beaten and sagging. Uncle Wade emerged from the house as they pulled up, a sneer twisting his face. Well, if it ain't the mountain man and his purchased property, he called out, swaggering toward them. Kendrick stepped down from the wagon, his height and presence making Wade pause. We've come for their mother's chest, he said simply, his voice level but carrying steel beneath. That old thing? Wade laughed, but his eyes darted between Kendrick and the barn. Ain't nothing but trash in there. Then you won't mind us taking it, Kendrick replied, helping the twins down from the wagon. Under Kendrick's watchful eye, Wade stayed back as Kathleen and Susanna entered the barn. The interior was dim and musty, filled with shadows and the smell of old hay. They climbed their rickety ladder to the loft, where dust and cobwebs covered years of forgotten items. There, Susanna pointed to a corner where familiar cedar wood gleamed dully through the grime. Together they brushed away the dust, revealing their mother's chest. The sight of it brought tears to their eyes. How many times had they watched her open it, handling its contents with such care? The brass clasps were tarnished but intact. Kendrick appeared at the top of the ladder. Found it? Yes, Kathleen answered, her voice thick with emotion. Help us carry it down? With Kendrick's strength, they managed to lower the chest to the barn floor. Uncle Wade lounged in the doorway, affecting disinterest but watching every move. Kathleen's hands trembled as she opened the clasps. Inside, the cedar smell rose fresh and sweet, stirring memories. Their mother's best dress lay folded on top. Then beneath it her Bible, wrapped carefully in cloth. At the bottom, tied with faded ribbon, they found a packet of yellowed papers. Worthless scraps. Wade spat from the doorway. Not worth the paper they're printed on. Kendrick turned toward him, his stance warning enough to keep Wade back. That's not for you to decide anymore. Outside, snow had begun falling heavily, the flakes thick and wet. They carefully loaded the chest into the wagon, securing it with rope. As they climbed back onto the seat, Wade called after them, "You'll never beat the railroad. They'll take that land, same as they take everything." Kendrick didn't respond, just clucked to the mule. The return journey was slower, the wagon wheels fighting deepening snow. The twins kept their hands on the chest, as if afraid it might vanish if they looked away. Night had fallen by the time they reached the cabin. Inside, Kendrick built up the fire while the twins reverently placed the chest near the hearth. They lit the lamp, its warm glow falling across the rough-hewn table where they carefully spread out the documents. Among letters and deed papers, they found what they sought, a formal treaty, its official seals still clear despite age. Kathleen's hands shook as she read the carefully penned words granting grazing rights to their mother and her heirs on the very land the railroad now claimed. "This is it," she whispered, touching the signatures at the bottom. "This is what Mama protected all those years." Kendrick studied the document, his expression thoughtful. "Your mother was a wise woman. She knew this land would be worth fighting for someday." The treaty lay before them, both promise and protection, their mother's final gift, giving them the means to defend their new home. Outside, snow continued falling, but inside the cabin, hope burned as warm as the crackling fire. The next morning dawned bright and cold, frost sparkling on every window pane. Kendrick carefully folded the treaty document and tucked it into his inner coat pocket, patting it to ensure its safety. The twins watched him with nervous anticipation, their mother's shawls wrapped tight against the morning chill. "Ready?" Kendrick asked, his gruff voice gentler than usual. They nodded, climbing onto the wagon seat. The journey into town felt different this time. No longer were they outcasts, but people with purpose. The mule's hooves clip-clopped steadily on the hard-packed dirt, carrying them past familiar buildings until they reached the white-clapboard church. Reverend Littlefeather stood waiting on the steps, his dark eyes kind as they approached. Inside, his small study, warmth from a pot-bellied stove drove away the morning's chill. Kendrick drew out the document with careful hands, spreading it on the preacher's desk. The Reverend adjusted his spectacles, examining each page with methodical patience. His fingers traced the official seals, studying the signatures with growing interest. "These markings," he said, pointing to a particular section, "these are Cherokee signatures. And here, the territorial governor's seal." He looked up, satisfaction clear on his face. "This is genuine, a binding agreement." Kathleen and Susanna exchanged glances, hope blooming in their hearts. "Can we take it to the judge?" Kathleen asked, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I'll arrange it myself," Reverend Littlefeather promised. "Judge Albright will see you first thing tomorrow morning." That evening, as they prepared to return home, Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house approached them on the street. "You must join us for supper," she insisted, taking Susanna's hand. "It's the least we can do after all your help during the influenza." The boarding house dining room buzzed with warmth and conversation. Kathleen and Susanna found themselves welcomed at the long table, seated among the very townspeople who had once mocked them. The twins exchanged uncertain glances at first, but gradually relaxed as platters of roasted chicken and fresh bread were passed around. "These girls," Mrs. Henderson announced to the table, "sat up 3 nights straight with my Tommy when his fever was highest. She squeezed Susanna's shoulder. "We won't forget that kindness." Other voices joined in, sharing stories of the twins' care during the outbreak. Kathleen felt her cheeks warm at the praise, but for once, she didn't try to make herself smaller. Beside her, Susanna actually laughed at a story someone told, the sound bright and unrestrained. "We'll stand with you tomorrow, Mr. Peterson," the merchant declared firmly. "That railroad can't just roll over honest folks." Murmurs of agreement rippled around the table. Kendrick watched it all from his place at the table's end, something like pride softening his weathered features. These girls who had arrived as auction block outcasts now sat among neighbors, their worth finally recognized. The next morning, Kathleen and Susanna dressed with special care, wrapping themselves in their mother's carefully preserved shawls. The courthouse loomed before them, its wooden steps worn smooth by years of boots. They climbed them together, Kendrick's solid presence at their side, heads held high despite their racing hearts. Inside, Judge Albright's courtroom smelled of wood polish and tobacco. The railroad foreman, Mr. Briggs, already waited there, his face darkening at their entrance. Several townspeople filed in behind them, including Reverend Littlefeather and Mrs. Henderson. Judge Albright, gray-haired and keen-eyed, called them forward. Kendrick presented the treaty with steady hands. "Your Honor, this document grants grazing rights to these girls' mother and her heirs, rights that still stand today." The judge examined each page carefully while Mr. Briggs shifted impatiently. "This land was promised for progress," the foreman interrupted. "No old paper should stop the railroad's advance." "The law respects valid treaties, Mr. Briggs," Judge Albright replied firmly. "As do I." He studied the document further, paying special attention to the seals and signatures. Finally, he looked up, his expression thoughtful. "I will need time to review this thoroughly and issue a formal ruling," he announced. "But I can tell you this document appears legitimate, with proper authority behind it." He fixed Mr. Briggs with a stern look. "No construction should proceed until this matter is settled." The foreman's face flushed red with anger, but he held his tongue. Kathleen felt Susanna's hand squeeze hers tight, hope trembling between them like a fragile bird. As they left the courthouse, townspeople gathered around them with words of encouragement and support. The twins stood straight and proud in their mother's shawls, no longer hiding from the world's gaze. They had found their place at last, not as burdens to be auctioned, but as valued members of a community willing to stand beside them. The wagon wheels crunched through fresh snow as they made their way back to the cabin that evening. Stars sparkled like diamonds scattered across the inky black sky, their brightness matching the hope in their hearts. The mule's steady breathing created little clouds in the frigid air as they climbed the final ridge toward home. Inside the cabin, Kendrick stoked the fire while Kathleen stirred a pot of rabbit stew. The familiar scents of sage and rosemary filled the warm air. Susanna set their mother's worn Bible on the table, running her fingers over its leather cover. "Just think," Kathleen said, ladling stew into tin bowls. "Come spring, we could plant a proper garden." Her eyes sparkled in the lamplight. "Maybe even some flowers by the door. Reckon we could build a proper chicken coop too," Kendrick added, a rare smile softening his weathered face. "Give those hens a finer home." They ate together, sharing dreams of improvements they could make once the land was legally secured. After the bowls were cleared, Kendrick picked up the Bible, his calloused fingers carefully turning the pages. "Your mother used to read from this," he said softly. Finding Psalm 23, he began to read, his deep voice carrying the ancient words of comfort through the cabin. The twins closed their eyes, remembering their mother's voice singing these same verses. Later, they settled into their beds. The fire banked for the night. Peace wrapped around them like a warm blanket as they drifted to sleep, unaware that danger lurked in the darkness outside. The acrid smell of smoke jolted Kendrick awake before dawn. His eyes flew open to an orange glow through the window. Fire! He shouted, leaping from his bed. "Girls, wake up! The cabin's burning!" Flames already licked up the outer walls, crackling hungrily in the winter air. Smoke began seeping through the log chinks. "Grab what you can carry," Kendrick ordered, rushing to throw open the door. "Hurry!" Kathleen lunged for their mothers. Hymn book while Susanna gathered the precious treaty papers, clutching them to her chest. Heat pressed against their faces as they stumbled outside into the bitter cold. Snow crunching beneath their feet, they retreated to a safe distance, watching in horror as flames devoured their home. The fire roared like a hungry beast, sending sparks spiraling up into the dark sky. Tears froze on the twins' cheeks as they huddled together, powerless to stop the destruction. Through the flames, Kendrick caught glimpses of horsemen disappearing into the trees. Railroad thugs, he knew, sent by Briggs to destroy their resolve. The mule brayed in fear from where it was tethered at the far end of the clearing, but mercifully out of danger. The roof collapsed with a thunderous crash, sending a cascade of burning embers into the night. Kathleen buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with sobs. Susanna stared numbly at the inferno, clutching the treaty papers tighter. They stood vigil until dawn painted the sky in pale streaks of pink and gold. Where their beloved cabin had stood, only smoking ruins remained. Blackened logs lay in a heap, wisps of smoke still rising from the ashes. The cold bit deeper now, with no walls to shelter them. Kendrick moved through the ruins like a ghost, his face etched with guilt and grief. Every charred beam felt like an accusation. He had promised to protect them, to give them a real home, and now they stood homeless in the snow. A neighbor, having seen the flames from his homestead, arrived with his wagon. Without a word, he helped them gather what little remained and offered them shelter in his barn. The ride to his farm passed in heavy silence, broken only by the occasional sob from the twins. The barn was warm at least, filled with the familiar smells of hay and livestock. They sat in the loft as evening approached, a lantern casting flickering shadows on the rough wooden walls. The neighbor's wife had brought them bread and cold meat, but none of them had much appetite. "Maybe we bring only curse," Susanna whispered, her voice thick with despair. First mother, then the auction, and now this. Kendrick sat with his head bowed, unable to find words of comfort. The lantern light carved deep shadows across his face, highlighting the weight of failure in his expression. His calloused hands, usually so capable, lay useless in his lap. The treaty papers and hymn book sat between them on the hay, all that remained of their hopes and history. Outside, snow began to fall again, its soft whisper a stark contrast to the violent destruction they had witnessed. In the gathering darkness, they huddled close, three broken souls seeking warmth in each other's presence, while their dreams lay smoldering in ashes on the mountainside. Gray dawn crept through the barn's weathered slats, casting pale stripes across the hay-strewn floor. The air hung heavy with frost, each breath visible in the dim light. Kendrick sat on an upturned bucket, his broad shoulders slumped beneath his buckskins. Beside him, Kathleen and Susanna huddled close, sharing a rough blanket the neighbor's wife had brought. Their breakfast was simple, cold bread and a bit of cheese. They ate without speaking, the events of the previous night weighing heavily on their minds. Every bite tasted of ash and defeat. The distant sound of cattle lowing and chickens scratching did nothing to lift their spirits. Kendrick turned the last piece of bread in his calloused hands, his thoughts dark as storm clouds. The high country beckoned, wild and free, far from railroad men and their burning matches. Up there, a man could lose himself in the endless peaks, forget about treaties and justice. He'd lived that way before, alone but safe. He glanced at the twins, their faces drawn with exhaustion. They deserved better than a life of running, hiding in mountain shadows like wounded animals. But what else could he offer now? Their home lay in ashes, their dreams scattered like cinders in the wind. The silence stretched thin as spider silk, ready to snap. Then, soft as morning mist, a melody rose from where the twins sat. Their voices, though trembling, carried clear and true through the barn. What was meant for harm, God used for good, through fire and storm. His promise stood. The simple hymn pierced Kendrick's heart like an arrow. These girls, who had lost everything twice over, still clung to faith like a lifeline. While he contemplated fleeing, they sang of God's faithfulness. Hot tears stung his eyes, blurring his vision. The strength of their belief shamed his weakness. Here he sat, a grown man, ready to surrender, while two young women showed more courage than he'd ever known. Unable to bear it, Kendrick slid from the bucket to his knees. "Lord," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion, "forgive my doubt. These girls trust you more than I ever have." The twins' song faded to silence, but its echo remained, filling the barn with something warmer than sunlight. They watched as Kendrick struggled with his prayers, their own eyes bright with understanding. As evening approached, snow began falling outside, each flake a silent promise of renewal. The three gathered close to a small lantern, its gentle light creating a circle of warmth in the gathering darkness. Together, they knelt in the soft hay. "We won't run," Kendrick declared, his voice steady now. "This land was meant for good, and by God's grace, we'll stand our ground." Kathleen squeezed his hand. "Together," she whispered. "Together," Susanna echoed, her face glowing with renewed purpose. They prayed then, their words rising like incense in the lantern light. They asked not for revenge, but for strength, not for escape, but for courage to face whatever came next. After the prayers, Kendrick carefully removed the treaty document from its hiding place. With gentle hands, he wrapped it in oilcloth, protecting the precious paper from harm. This was more than just a legal document now. It was their testament of faith, proof that God could bring good from evil. The twins settled against his shoulders as night deepened, their breathing growing slow and steady. Despite the hard floor beneath them and the uncertain future ahead, peace wrapped around them like a warm cloak. They had found something stronger than fear. They had found each other, and they had found faith. Outside, snow continued falling, coating the world in pristine white. But inside their hearts, a different kind of covering had fallen, the quiet assurance that they were not alone in their struggle. Hope, like a tiny flame, flickered to life again, warming them from within. Kendrick watched the twins sleep, their faces peaceful in the lantern's glow. These girls had taught him more about courage than all his years in the mountains. Whatever came next, they would face it standing tall, their faith as firm as the mountains themselves. The winter dawn painted the sky in streaks of pale rose and gold. Frost sparkled on wagon wheels and fence posts as Kendrick led the mule from the neighbor's barn. His movements were stiff but purposeful as he fitted the worn harness, checking each buckle with care. The twins emerged from the barn wrapped in borrowed shawls, their faces still bearing traces of last night's smoke and ash. "Ready?" Kendrick asked softly, offering his hand to help them up onto the wagon seat. They nodded, climbing aboard with quiet dignity. Though their clothes were soot-stained and their eyes tired, they held themselves straight-backed as Kendrick flicked the reins. The wagon creaked into motion, carrying them toward town through the crisp morning air. News of the cabin fire had raced ahead of them. As they approached the main street, people emerged from shops and homes, gathering in clusters along the boardwalk. Unlike the jeering crowd from auction day, these faces showed concern and anger on their behalf. "Ain't right, burning folks out," muttered old Tom from the mercantile, loud enough to carry. "Those railroad men gone too far this time," agreed the blacksmith, his leather apron dusted with soot from his forge. The wagon rolled to a stop near the church, where Reverend Littlefeather stood waiting on the steps. His dark eyes were serious as he approached them. "Come inside," he said, gesturing toward the church door. Word's gone out. People want to help. Inside the small sanctuary, Miners still wearing their work clothes sat beside ranchers in dusty boots. Women from town occupied the front pews, whispering among themselves. The wooden benches filled quickly as more townsfolk arrived. Reverend Littlefeather moved to the front, raising his hands for quiet. "Brothers and sisters," he began, his voice carrying to every corner, "we've witnessed a great wrong. But the good book teaches us to stand together in times of trouble." Kathleen and Susanna sat close together in the front pew, their hands clasped tight. Kendrick stood behind them, his hat clutched in weathered fingers. "That railroad thinks it can burn out honest folk," called out Jensen, a grizzled miner. "Well, I say we show them different." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the congregation. The butcher's wife stood up, her face flushed with emotion. "Those girls nursed half the town through fever. We won't forget that kindness." One by one, people rose to speak. Ranchers offered grazing land for the mule and cow. The boarding house keeper promised rooms until something more permanent could be arranged. Miners volunteered to help rebuild come spring. Reverend Littlefeather nodded in approval. "Let us take this matter to the courthouse today. Show Judge Albright that this community stands as one." As evening approached, a remarkable sight unfolded on the town's main street. Townspeople gathered in growing numbers, forming a solid column behind Kendrick and the twins as they walked toward the courthouse. The setting sun caught the windows in sheets of gold as they filed inside, filling every bench in the courtroom. The railroad foreman, Harlan Briggs, burst through the doors minutes later. His face reddened at the sight of the packed room. "This is irregular," he blustered, glaring at the crowd. "These proceedings should be private." "These are public proceedings, Mr. Briggs," Judge Albright stated firmly from his bench. "The community has every right to attend." Briggs jabbed a finger toward Kendrick. "That man's claim is worthless. The railroad's rights supersede your rights. Don't include burning homes," someone called from the gallery. Voices rose in agreement until the judge rapped his gavel for order. "We'll hold a formal hearing tomorrow morning," Judge Albright announced. 10 o'clock sharp. All parties will present their evidence properly. As darkness fell, the church became a sanctuary of a different kind. Quilts and blankets appeared, donated by townspeople. Women brought baskets of food, fresh bread, cold chicken, apple pie. The twins found themselves surrounded by genuine kindness, a stark contrast to the mockery they'd once endured. Late into the night, hymns filled the church. Voices lifted in harmony, some rough, some sweet, all joining together in songs of faith and perseverance. Kendrick watched as Kathleen and Susanna joined in, their faces glowing in the lamplight. The twins settled onto pallets near the altar, wrapped in the town's borrowed blankets. Around them, several families had stayed, sleeping in the pews or on the floor, refusing to leave them alone. The sight made Kendrick's throat tight with emotion. In the quiet hours before midnight, as the singing finally faded to peaceful silence, Kendrick realized something profound had changed. They were no longer three isolated souls standing against the railroad. They had become part of something larger, a community united in defense of what was right. Morning sunlight streamed through the courthouse windows, casting long golden bars across the wooden floor. The benches creaked under the weight of seemingly every soul in town, packed shoulder to shoulder in Sunday best or work clothes. At the front, Kathleen and Susanna sat straight back beside Kendrick, their mother's shawls draped carefully around their shoulders. Reverend Littlefeather stood nearby, his presence calm and steady. Behind him sat three Cherokee elders who had traveled through the night to attend, their weathered faces dignified beneath silver hair. Judge Albright entered, his black robe sweeping as he took his seat. The room rose in respect, then settled, as his gavel cracked against wood. "This hearing will come to order," he announced, voice carrying to the rafters. "We're here to determine the validity of certain treaty rights concerning disputed territories." Railroad Foreman Briggs rose first, straightening his expensive vest. "Your Honor, these so-called rights are decades old. Progress can't be held back by outdated papers." He gestured dismissively toward the twins. "The railroad has federal authority to construct its line. The treaty was signed before God and witnesses," Reverend Littlefeather countered, stepping forward. "I've examined the document myself. The seals and signatures are genuine." Judge Albright nodded to the Cherokee elders. "The court would hear your testimony regarding these marks." The eldest among them, his silver hair tied back with a leather cord, approached the bench. In careful English, he confirmed each signature. Tribal leaders he had known in his youth, their marks as familiar as his own name. The other elders added their voices, establishing an unbroken chain of memory and authority. Kathleen rose next, her hands trembling slightly, but her voice clear. "Our mother taught us about this land, Your Honor. She said it was a sacred trust, meant to pass from mother to daughter." Her words carried weight in the hushed courtroom. "She showed us the boundary stones, taught us the medicinal plants that grow here." Susanna joined her sister, speaking softly but with conviction. "When fever struck town, we used her knowledge to help heal the sick. The land provides for all who respect it, just as she taught us." Briggs scoffed. "Sentiment doesn't build railroads. These girls can't even maintain a proper home. Their cabin burned down." His words drew angry mutters from the crowd. "That cabin burned because your men set it ablaze," Kendrick declared, rising to his full height. The scars on his face caught the morning light as he faced the judge. "I owe my life to their mother. Years ago, she found me half dead in winter. Storms shared her last food to keep me alive." His voice roughened with emotion. "Now I stand for her daughters, who've shown the same strength and kindness she did." Murmurs of approval rippled through the courthouse. The butcher's wife dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, while miners nodded in grim agreement. Judge Albright studied the treaty document carefully, holding it up to the light. Hours passed as testimony continued, dust motes dancing in the sunbeams. Finally, he set the papers down and cleared his throat. "The law must respect both progress and precedent," he began. "These treaty rights were properly granted and have never been rescinded. Moreover, the current holders of these rights have demonstrated their commitment to the community's welfare." He fixed Briggs with a stern gaze. "The court finds that the treaty remains binding. The disputed land shall remain under the guardianship of Kathleen and Susanna as their mother's rightful heirs. The railroad must adjust its route accordingly." The courthouse erupted in cheers. Women rushed forward to embrace the twins, while men clapped Kendrick on the back. Reverend Littlefeather smiled broadly, clasping hands with the elders. Briggs slammed his papers into his leather satchel. "This isn't over," he snarled, stalking toward the door. "The railroad has friends in high places." But his threats rang hollow as he stormed out. The power he had wielded through fear was broken against the united will of the community and the clear light of justice. Kathleen and Susanna clung to each other, tears streaming down their faces. Their mother's shawls wrapped them in an embrace that felt like a blessing from beyond. Kendrick placed his weathered hands on their shoulders, and for once his stern features softened with unmistakable pride. "Your mama would be mighty pleased," he said gruffly, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "You stood strong, just like she taught you." The morning sun continued to pour through the windows, turning their tears to gold. Weeks melted into the heart of winter, but the sound of hammers rang bright across the snow-covered meadow. The new cabin rose steadily on higher ground, its sturdy logs forming walls that would shelter 3 hearts instead of 1. Where Kendrick's old cabin had stood in solitude, this home grew surrounded by helping hands and hopeful spirits. Miners and ranchers appeared daily, bringing tools and strong backs. Women from town delivered steaming pots of stew and fresh-baked bread wrapped in cloth. Even the merchant who had once watched them with doubt now brought nails and window glass, refusing payment with a gruff wave. "Ain't right what the railroad done," he'd said, setting down his offerings. "Figure this makes us even for them days. Your girls nursed my wife through fever." The walls rose log by log, each timber fitted with care. Kathleen proved strong at directing where support should go, while Susanna kept everyone fed with help from the neighbors' kitchens. Kendrick worked tirelessly, his scarred hands steady with axe and saw, teaching the girls the ways of frontier building as he went. One evening, as gentle snow began to drift from pearl-gray skies, the three sat in their half-finished home. The borrowed cast-iron stove radiated warmth, and coffee bubbled in tin cups. Fresh bread from the minister's wife filled the air with the scent of home, while sawdust and pine pitch added their own honest perfume. Kathleen broke off a piece of bread, savoring its warmth. "Remember when folks used to turn away when we walked past?" she asked softly. Susanna nodded, her eyes bright in the gathering dusk. "Now they bring food and ask after our health like kinfolk." Kendrick set down his coffee cup, his weathered face thoughtful in the stove's glow. "You two earned their respect fair and square," he said. "Nursing the sick, standing up to the railroad, keeping faith when that fire took everything." He cleared his throat, emotion roughening his voice. "Makes me proud to call you my daughters in every way that matters." The twins' faces lit up at his words, joy replacing the old shadows of shame. Kathleen reached for his calloused hand while Susanna leaned against his shoulder, the three of them whole in a way that needed no explanation. As darkness draped the mountains in purple velvet, lamplight spilled from their window like a beacon. The borrowed lantern cast their shadows on the half-finished walls that would soon hold their laughter, prayers, and dreams. Susanna pulled out their mother's hymnal, its pages worn smooth with love. Their voices rose together in the old familiar song, Kendrick's deep bass supporting the twins' sweet harmony. The music drifted out into the winter night, carrying hope like a flame. Through the window, the eternal mountains stood dark against star-scattered skies. Their peaks had witnessed countless stories of loss and redemption, but perhaps none sweeter than this. Three souls once broken by loneliness, now bound together by mercy, faith, and courage. In the lantern's glow, their faces shone with quiet joy. Where mockery had once lived, dignity now bloomed. Where shame had dwelt, belonging took root. Their future stretched before them, secure in grace and each other, their bond stronger than any foundation of wood and stone. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.